Local history. Local culture. Local events. Your community. This is the Joe Kelly Show.
Hi there, everybody. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us. Frank Tomaino is our guest. I ought to point out that we're up at WUTR this week. We're in studio, new studio, and we're happy to have Frank in as our first guest in the new studio. Frank, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, great to be here.
The topic for today is, well, we'll start off with this anyway, cars. A lot of people don't realize that UTICA had a very, well, I don't know, what's
we were, you know, I always say there's certain times in our history in this area were exciting times. And I think in the 1840s, when the knitting mills switched to steam, the loom to boom era after World War II, pretty exciting, a lot of things happening. And the turn of the 20th century, when automobiles all of a sudden were appearing. You know, in 1900, I did a little research, there were 76 million people in the United States. Only 4,000 car owners in 1900. And many of them in Oneida and Herkimer County, especially Oneida County. We were at the beginning of the auto industry. We were right at the beginning of being one of the major centers. It never happened, but...
and it's because of one guy, though, really, wasn't it, Frank?
Well, yeah, I would say Charles S. Mott was one of the, one of the leaders in the industry. He became one of the great leaders in the industry. But
what did Mott do in Utica?
Well, Charles S. Mott, he was born in Newark, New Jersey, but his family. His father was a businessman, and his father eventually began making bicycles in Utica. He partnered with a man named Weston and the Weston Mott Company. They began making bicycles.
What year are we talking about?
Well, 1899, 1900,
okay.
right at the turn of the century.
And where were they doing that, Frank?
Well, they bought a factory on Burstone Road. I always like to say just west of Faxton Hospital. Around under the bridge where Lincoln Ave at that time went under the bridge, the Burstone Road Bridge. And they were making bicycle hubs and wheels. But then when the automobile industry started, automobiles really in the Flint, Michigan area, Buick, Cadillac. So when Mott's father left the business, Charles, his son, who was a mechanical engineer, he was a graduate of Stevens Institute of Technology, Hoboken, New Jersey, so he knew engineering. And he began to develop wheels for automobiles. But the automobile companies were demanding not only wheels, but axles. And Mott, who had moved to Utica by that time, Charles S. Mott, began to make not only wheels, but axles for automobiles. And he got a contract with Buick from Flint, Michigan, to make axles for the Buick.
Here in Utica?
That was the beginning, in Utica, on the factory on Burstone Road. And that was really the beginning. And
Frank, about where on Burstone Road was it? Any idea?
Well, I could never find out the exact spot, but at that time, maybe it still does, Lincoln Ave went under Burstone Road, and it was, well, I don't know what's there now. I would say I was like just west of Faxton Hospital in that area there. And as I said, he began to make bicycle wheels and then automobile wheels and automobile axles. I think Mott himself designed an axle that Buick and then later Cadillac became interested in buying, and they began to buy their axles. And Mott employed almost 300 people in his factory, so it was a big deal. Well, at that time in Flint, Michigan, there was a man named, and I'm forgetting his name, was interested in merging Buick and Cadillac and forming General Motors. And he came to Utica and convinced Mott to move to Flint, Michigan. It would save time, shipping the axles from Utica, because Cadillac and Buick wanted a lot of axles. Mott, who wasn't getting that much encouragement from the knitting mill people in this area, knitting mills paid low wages. The automobile industry was paying higher wages. So Mott left Utica and moved to Flint, Michigan.
How many jobs went?
Well, I could never find out, but he did offer his employees, if you want to move to Flint, come along, and many did. I'm guessing maybe 150 left Utica and moved to Flint, Michigan. And eventually, General Motors purchased the Mott Axle company. Charles Mott did not accept money. He said, "Give me stock in your company." And he was made a vice president. And he was also on the board of directors.
Of General Motors.
Of this new company, a young company, General Motors. And he began to accumulate stock. And we lost a very, very important, if he had stayed here, who knows what would have happened.
Yeah, and was it Mott, or am I thinking of somebody else, Frank, that was involved with the AAA motor club?
Well, here's the thing. Again, as I said, in 1900, there weren't that many cars. Cars were expensive. So a group of motorists in Oneida and Herkimer County met in Utica and formed the Utica Automobile Club, 1901. One of the few automobile clubs in the country. In 1902, a group of automobile clubs throughout the country met in Chicago and decided to form a national automobile club. They invited Utica. Utica sent Mott, who had become president of the Utica Automobile Club. So Mott went to Chicago, and 9 clubs, Utica, Philadelphia, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Long Island, New York City, and a couple in the Midwest, formed the American Automobile Association, AAA today.
Right.
So Utica was one of 9 clubs that were the original members of AAA, and Mott represented Utica at that meeting.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. Frank Tomaino is our guest. We're talking about local history, as we always do when Frank's in. He continues to write his history column for the Observer-Dispatch and is very active with the United County History Center. Short break, right back. And welcome back, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. Frank Tomaino is our guest. Frank's the guy we go to when we want to talk local history because he's seen a lot of it. His first byline in the Observer-Dispatch, 1958. Yeah. Do you remember what that story was?
It was a football game between Canastota and Holland Patton.
Okay. Did you get it right?
I guess so. It was about 4 paragraphs. And I'll never forget, it was on Sport Pages, and I didn't expect a byline, but there was the byline. I was going to Utica College at the time, and I was a stringer for the OD. You know.
Who was the sports editor?
Len Wilbur.
Okay, so
Great guy.
Yep. He was a great guy. Yeah, did a lot for the community.
Yes.
We've been talking cars, and Charles Mott, Frank, wasn't the only person that was affiliated with the car industry in Utica. There were a couple other guys, and one was Willoughby. Was it Ed Willoughby?
Edward Willoughby, yeah, who was a carriage maker in Rome.
Carriage, like in horse and carriage?
Yeah, right, yeah. In fact, most of the first automobile manufacturers in this area were carriage makers. You know, it was easy. You had a carriage, you just throw a motor on it, and you had an automobile. And, you know, and the battle going on at that time between electric cars, steam, and gasoline, you know, which would win?
Yeah.
Women preferred the electric cars because you didn't have to crank them. The steam was very popular, and but gasoline won out. But anyway, yeah, Ed Willoughby made carriages, and his factory in Rome burned, and he decided to move to Utica. And he moved into a factory. It was near where the Boilermaker starts. And he began to make, at that time, the automobile industry, you know, they needed axles, they needed everything, and they needed chassis, bodies for the car. And he had some skilled workers with him. And they began to make bodies for Fisher Brothers, Cadillac, Rolls-Royce, all handmade bodies. He had a couple of hundred really skilled workers. I knew one of them. When I was working at Griffiths Air Force Base, Willoughby went out of business in the late 30s, the Depression. And he had been a worker with, a metal worker with Willoughby. And he told me, some of the workers he worked with, they were really skilled working with metal. And as I said, if you were able to make bodies for Rolls-Royce and Cadillac, you had to be pretty good. So
was the actual entire body made here?
Oh yeah, the entire body by hand. How they did it, I don't know.
Yeah.
But
and then they would ship it to.
And they was and then Fisher Bodies. I think Fisher Bodies made all the bodies for General Motors car, Chevys, Buicks, Oldsmobiles. So it was a pretty important industry.
You know, I still remember, and I can't remember all the details of it, but I remember hearing advertisements, seeing advertisements, Body by Fisher.
Oh yeah, well Willoughby wasn't the only company that made bodies for Fisher, but Willoughby was one of the companies in Utica, hiring skilled, well-paid workers. But the Depression really hurt the automobile industry, and Willoughby was one of the victims. But as I said, Utica in 1900, Oneida County had a lot of carriage makers for some reason. So it was very easy to turn into making automobiles. The Remington, Philo Remington, who was a grandson of the founder of Remington Arms in Ilion, he was from Ilion, made the Remington automobile in Utica. It didn't last long. The Buckmobile was made in Utica.
I never heard of that one.
The Buckmobile was a factory on Sunset Avenue, Shepherd, right where the fire station is on Shepherd Place. There was a factory there, the Buckmobile. They didn't last long, these companies, because, you know, every city that had a carriage maker began making automobiles, and they became very popular. And where the Utica Automobile Club and AAA were very, very important at that time, Oneida County became one of the country's leaders in demanding paved roads. Not many roads were paved in those days. Fair traffic laws. When the automobile first come out, if you had an automobile in Utica, the horses had the right of way. If a horse was coming down the street, you had to stop and shut your engine off, because the noise would bother the horses. So these clubs tried to get those laws changed. Speed limits were like 10 miles an hour. So Utica, there was a man in Utica called Pierre Pont White, the grandson of Hugh White, founder of Whitestown. He became a national leader in demanding better roads. The automobile was, we're talking 1905, 1906, and you had either dirt roads or Genesee was a cobblestone road. Well, you're in those early automobiles on cobblestone, it's pretty tough.
Yeah.
So Oneida County became a leader, a national leader, in demanding better roads. Yep.
The other name that comes to my mind going along this track, Frank, is Kaiser. Was it Henry Kaiser?
Henry Kaiser. There's another one. I wish he had kept his industry here. Henry Kaiser was, he was born south of Canajoharie. And then his father, his family, when he was a young man, they moved to Whitesboro. And he left school, he was 11 years old, and he got a job at J.B. Wells in Utica, which is a department store, which at that time was on Lower Genesee Street. And he used to walk 4 miles a day, 11 years old, from Whitesboro to J.B. Wells. Can you imagine that? And back. And he worked there for a while, and then as he got older, he got into photography. He opened a place in Lake Placid, a photo shop. And, but he always, of course, then later, he moved to California, became a contractor, began to build bridges, roads, Hoover Dam. He was one of the builders of Hoover Dam. And during World War II, to me, he was one of the heroes of World War II. When England was in the war alone, Germany had defeated France and needed supplies from the United States. And the Nazi U-boats were just sinking cargo ships from the United States to England. And we couldn't build, it took about 30 months to build a big cargo ship. They called Henry Kaiser from Whitesboro, and he wasn't living in Whitesboro at the time, but he developed an assembly line type thing where they were building these ships in 30 days instead of 30 months.
Were those the Liberty ships?
Liberty ships.
Hang on to your thought, because we're going to take a break. We'll come back and we'll talk about the Liberty ship. Frank Tomaino is our guest. We also want to talk about the panel discussion you and I are going to be at up at the United County History Center. Short break, right back. And welcome back to the show, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. Frank Tomaino is our guest. We're talking local history. Frank, of course, continues to write his column for the Observer-Dispatch. Frank, we were talking about Kaiser, but before I forget, I want to ask you about that panel discussion. We're having it at the United County History Center. What's the date?
November 4th, a Saturday. Mm-hmm. I believe 2 o'clock.
Okay.
Yeah.
I should know that. Because I'm part of it, but open to the public, and we're going to be talking about newspapers.
They have a new Saturday Globe exhibit up there, and I guess we'll talk about the Globe and journalism today.
Yeah, and also on the panel will be Dave Didak, retired editor at the Observer-Dispatch for many years, and Pam Spearback, who is an editor now with the Sentinel.
Yeah, she's managing editor, yeah.
So it's going to be fun. And Everybody's
we'd
invited
I'd like to have a big crowd, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll open it up
to questions.
to questions,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if we get any that I can't answer,
Oh, yeah.
I'm
I'll
gonna-
turn it over to Dave and Pam.
We're talking about Mr. Kaiser. He built the Liberty ships, and those Liberty ships were really one of the ways that we won the war.
It's the only way. People forget, before we got into the war, it was England alone, Great Britain alone, fighting the Nazis. And you got to give them credit. They just were not, tough. They just would not surrender. And depended on us, our supplies, not only oil and food and everything. And the Liberty ships, again, with Henry Kaiser, they were, again, every 30 days, they were building dozens a week. We just overwhelmed the Nazi U-boats. That you could only sink so many ships. And, you know, and until then, we got into the war. But the Liberty ships were vital to England surviving. You know.
Where were they building the ships, Frank?
You know, I imagine more than one spot.
Yeah.
But I really don't know. You know, yeah.
The Kaiser was he not involved with health insurance, Kaiser Permanente? Wasn't that one of his companies?
I know he was involved with automobiles after.
Yeah, talk about that, Frank.
Well, after World War II, he and a man named Joseph Frazier began making automobiles. The Frazier Kaiser automobile, I remember right after World War II. And they made a little car called a Henry J, named after him. And it was pretty popular for 3, 4, 5 years, but then just couldn't compete with, you know, the big dealers. You know.
Wasn't he involved with the Jeeps too, Frank?
Well, yeah. Later, Kaiser Frazier bought Willys Jeep, and I think they called it the Overland Willys Jeep. Was owned by Kaiser Frazier, and then he sold it to American Motors. Yeah.
The fortune that he had was just incredible.
Well, yeah, you know, he was he loved Utica. I mean, and not only Utica, though, it's just this whole area. And he used to come here often. At the Utica Chamber of Commerce's 50th anniversary, he was the main speaker at Hotel Utica. And he talked about his early days living in Utica. Somebody asked him, how did you become successful? What's your secret? He said, you got to work longer hours than the next guy. Work hard and work longer hours than the next guy, and you'll be a success.
When you talk about coming back to Hotel Utica for a significant anniversary, I think of another Utica guy who came back, brought all his managers from all his stores around the country back to Utica.
Yeah, Woolworth, who, as we talked about before, his first store was on Bleecker Street in Utica, and it failed, but he always blamed he couldn't afford advertising, and he didn't have enough items, so he always was liked Utica as a city. So at the 50th anniversary, all these, by that time they had over 3,000 stores all over the world, including a couple in Utica. And they called the general managers, and they were going to have a 58-year celebration. And they were in several cities, but in the main celebration was in Utica, because he never forgot, in Hotel Utica, this is in the late 20s, he never forgot how Utica had treated him when he was first starting.
You know, it's interesting that he had such good feelings for Utica because, as you say, that first store on Bleecker Street, very close to Genesee. What's in there now, Frank? What would be?
Well, it was the Boston store, the Bleecker Street entrance to the Boston store, about that area there.
Yeah.
So that I don't know it was the School of Commerce.
Okay.
RCIL.
Wasn't it the Boston store what they called the Annex?
Well, the Annex.
Yeah.
It's the foot of Charlotte Street.
Right.
Yeah.
But the store failed, as you said, and then he closed shop here and went to Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
But he added more merchandise. Instead of just being everything for a nickel, it was a 5 and dime.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what happened in Utica, he began selling items for a nickel. Well, and I guess he stayed here, he was here for about 3 months. But eventually his customers bought everything he had, and he couldn't replace, and there's only so many things you could sell for a nickel. So you're right, when he went to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, he got dime items and more items. And it became a big success, and before you know it, but he returned to Utica once he became a big success, and he built a store on Genesee Street, about where the Genesee Street entrance to the Boston store was.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the big modern store, a block up on the Woolworths. Yeah.
On the east side of Genesee Street.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a great store.
Oh, yeah. We talked about it so many times. The first thing you walked in were these 2 big candy counters.
Yeah.
You could smell that chocolate,
Yeah. I remember when they did away with that candy counter, and I worked at the OD, and I think it was Neil Bintz, an editor, a long time, who sent me over there and said, go write a story about that old candy counter, and they took it down and moved it up in the attic or something.
Yeah, they used to have chunks of chocolate. Yeah. You could buy big chunks of chocolate. It was a very, very busy store. And of course, the first store in this area to have an escalator.
Yeah, it only went one way, and
only went up.
Yeah.
And I often wondered, I haven't been in that building in a long time, if that escalator is still there.
Yeah. Also had, we don't have time to get into it today, maybe some other day, was that lunch counter. Great lunch counter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Give us the date again, Frank, of that panel discussion.
November 4th, a Saturday at the History Center. I believe it's 2 o'clock. You could call the History Center to make sure. But it's open to the public, plenty of seating. We got a nice bookstore and a gift shop. You could look around. And
me, you, Dave Didayek, and Pam Spearback are going to be talking about newspapers.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And you've got a lot of memories of newspapers.
Yeah, I guess so.
As do I and Dave. Pam's more modern day, but she'll have some things to kick in there.
Yeah.
That's going to do it for us this week. Frank, thanks for coming in as always. We'll be back next week. We'll do it all again. Don't forget, speaking of websites, cnyhomepage.com. There's lots of good stuff there. Until next time, take care of yourself, everybody.